Hey everybody, this is Ray, and this is my first tutorial. And, as you can see on the screen. Woo! This is so exciting. Not really. So what we're gonna do today is we're gonna learn how I shade and do basic lighting for my pieces because I've received numerous compliments on that, weirdly enough. Okay, so I really hope that you enjoy this and that it's helpful. So what we've got here is an already colored in piece of myself. It's a self-portrait of back when I had real hair, well, real long hair. So what I do is I do a clipping layer, and then I select color that's the same as the coloring that's on the layer that it's clipped to. I turn the layer to multiply, and I do some line shading, which is just solid shading, like hard lines, hard shadows. And I draw that in. I usually do the, the ears right underneath the neck, the, the eyes right underneath the nose and the lips, shadows by the hair, as you can see right there. I generally use my binary tool for this because it's easier for me to just fill in the lines with the paint bucket. So what I do then is on the other color, the one that's automatically set to white, I use the dropper tool to make it the same color as the multiply. So it's a little bit darker. And after I set the opacity to not being able to change it, I use the airbrush tool to make it darker in some areas. Then I move on to the soft shading, which I use my airbrush for. That's things like the cheeks, just soft, because it's soft shading. And I do go back over that with the darker color as well, with the opacity set to not being able to change once I'm done with the majority of the shading. This allows me to have slight variations in the color, which also allows me to more finely control the appearance of the shadows. And then I go and I use a slightly smaller airbrush to and then I use the add tool, which would be Lumosity and Paint Tool Psi, and I do the highlights like cheeks and stuff like that. I'll go back over it with the smaller brush, with smaller airbrush for more fine tuning, as you can see there. This is up to 2 times speed, because otherwise this tutorial would have been a lot longer. So now I pretty much repeat that with the rest of things that aren't hair. Hair, I do a completely different thing. Here I'm using Psi to make little wrinkles and stuff, because I forgot that top in real life has the ripple things. So I've set it to multiply and use the line tool, well, the curve tool, to make some good lines for that. And because multiply is so great, it looks pretty good. Then I go into the hair, which I use a slightly different technique. I still put it on multiply, and I still use the binary tool, but I do spiky lines that are all connected, and then I use paint by the layer, not the whole canvas, so that it's just a lot easier for me that way. I try and just go like, okay, this is where shadows will be in my head, then that's how I do that. It's kind of hard to explain. Then I'll go back over it with the blur tool so that it doesn't look quite so harsh. And then I'll use numerous different airbrush things to make that happen. And here I'm using a white on Lumosity / add to make it more obvious to you where I'm putting the lines for this layer of shading. This is to give it the illusion of depth, the illusion that, oh, hey, there's different layers of hair there. So that's why I set it to multiply, go back over with a larger airbrush with the same technique, then much smaller, same technique. That really gives a depth to the hair that I really like, because I'm not good at doing hair unless I have a lot of steps to it. Then I go into add a lumosity and pretty much just do the same thing, but without the harsh lines, because with add I don't think that it looks good. So that's that. Then I copy all the layers. Copy all the layers. Paste it into a new folder. Duplicate that twice. First one I set to add. I delete the part of that layer that will be in shadow, as you can see here, and then I blur the edges so that it's not quite so harsh. Then I select that layer by opacity, and then I delete the layer above that from what's selected there, and that layer right there is set to multiply, so that's the shadows. And then I do a new layer, and that's how I figure out what I want the background to be. But this is me realizing that I forgot to shade in the eye, because I forgot that the whites of the eye needed to be shaded in, and that I hadn't done that previously. So I just hurriedly do that. I usually select the color that I did the eyelashes in for that, and then the lightest color of the eye I do in Lumosity for the eye shine. So that looks good, I think, anyway. Okay, so then I decide what color I want the background to be, so that I know pretty much what I want to do. I was going to do a more complicated background for this, but then I realized that my hand was killing me. So I kind of rushed this one, and plus I'm not good at backgrounds. What I did here was I did multiply. I did the ombre tool, then multiplied over a solid color to make a light in front, dark in back effect. Then I did add in front to make it a little bit lighter. And there we go. Then I duplicated that and did clipping so that it's over that. Put it on overlay, I think, and that gave it a nice, more overall color. Then I did a very light shade of that blue, and I put that over the front edges to give it an effect of like, oh, hey, there's light coming from in front, so there's light shining on the face. And I'll adjust that until it's where I want it to be. Sometimes I'll do it in overlay, sometimes I'll do an add. It just really depends. Then I'll do a darker blue for the shadows in the back, again to give more of a sense of depth, which is really what you're trying to do when you're doing this kind of shading. So that's a thing. Then what you're going to do is you're going to try and find something good for another layer of overlay. So what I did was I did a whole bunch of blue. Like a whole bunch of that blue. I just did a gradient from almost white down to almost black with the square tool, as you can see there. And then what I'm going to do is show you 2 different techniques for getting it all to blur. There's the difficult version, and then there's the slightly less difficult version. Alright, so what we're going to do is we're going to widen it until it takes up the whole screen. Then put it up a little bit until it fills up the whole screen. Then make it itty bitty teeny tiny. Then make it big again. Sorry. Make it big again. Come on. Okay, make it a little bit smaller. Make it a little bit bigger. Make it a little bit smaller. Make it bigger. And just you can just repeat that until you've got it nice and blurred. Or you can go and do your Gaussian blur in your filter. I don't know if they have that inside because I mostly use Fire Alpaca. So I do that, and then I just expand it until it takes up pretty much the whole screen. Then I duplicate the layer until pretty much there's no transparent left. Then I do overlay or multiply. You just, mess around with it until you're happy using different layer effects. Really, it just depends on what you want. But those are my techniques, and I hope you enjoyed. Bye!